Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining me. I have just finished watching Beatles 64, the brand new documentary that's streaming from today on Disney+. This is by David Tedeschi and Martin Scorsese. It is fully approved by Apple, made by Apple essentially, featuring brand new interviews with Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr, plus archival footage of interviews with George and John. Now, this documentary focuses almost exclusively on the first Beatles' US visit in February 1964, using a lot of the Maysles brothers footage that was shot at the time and obviously was made into a film at the time and has been used extensively in things like the Beatles anthology. But we've also got some unused footage here as well as it's interspersed with a lot of other things that I'm going to talk about. I've got a lot of notes here. I'm going to go through this fairly much in order of how it appears in the film. But I want your thoughts. Let me know down in the comments if you've seen this, what you think of it, whether you agree with me, whether you disagree with me. That's absolutely fine. So the film starts off with a little bit of backstory, not the Beatles' backstory though, but the fact that the Beatles were coming to America shortly after the assassination of JFK, just sort of 2 or 3 months later. So we have some interview footage from John F. Kennedy, and then it sort of all goes somber. We know what's happened, and then really weirdly, this is probably my least favourite moment of the whole documentary, is right near the start. We've got Billie Eilish singing a brand new version of All My Loving in her most miserable voice. I see no reason for that absolutely whatsoever, unless are they trying to do this to bring in new fans, to appeal to a younger audience? I don't know, but I didn't really need Billie Eilish singing in what is effect the opening song of the movie. That's going to be my biggest criticism. There'll be others, but that's my biggest criticism of this whole documentary. So it then cuts to the train journey. Beatles have arrived in America, they're going on the train into New York, and we've got some fantastic footage here. A lot of people will be interested to know about the quality of the film footage. It was very well recorded in black and white, and it, to my eyes, it looks like it hasn't gone down the Peter Jackson Get Back route of being sort of overly processed to be cleaned up for modern viewing. It looks to me like the footage has just been cleaned really well, rather than being overly processed. So I thought it looks really nice. And you've got some beautiful footage of here, for example, John Lennon is listening to his own voice through headphones. Now, I'm thinking maybe where headphones must have been probably quite a relatively new invention back then. I could be wrong, actually. Let me know. I'm not sure. But he's going, I can hear my own voice. He's really happy to hear that. And you just see them in really unguarded moments while all the madness is going on around them and they're sort of protected from it in their train. Really nice to see all that stuff. But not a great deal of it, as I will come on to. It then cuts to, we have sort of one of the main bits of non-linear storytelling here. It cuts to Washington DC, which of course came a few days later. She Loves You, not the full song, but most of the song sounds great. They've really cleaned up the audio footage here as well. Probably about as good as they can do. Have they used the MAL technology that was used in Get Back? I wonder. It certainly sounds like they might have done, because it did sound really good. It didn't sound sort of hi-fi quality, but then again, it probably wasn't brilliantly engineered at the time. Ringo tells a story, for example, about he tells a story later on about the Ed Sullivan show, where they'd done the sound check and all the sort of mixing desk had been set up and everything for them to play. And then a cleaner came along and just dusted it all and just wiped all the settings. They weren't thinking about the audio quality that was needed 60 years later for a documentary. So we'll give them a bit of forgiveness on that one. We've got a lot of talking heads footage throughout this movie, and in a similar way to how it was on 2016's 8 Days a Week movie, the Ron Howard movie that was made. And I know that was very critical of the talking head style of people like Whoopi Goldberg, for example, and I think it was Sigourney Weaver was in it as well, wasn't she? And people were saying, well, did we really need that footage? Of the Talking Heads footage that's in this documentary, some of it I think is really great. Ronnie Spector, for example, tells a great story about, and this is a modern day interview, she tells a great story about how on that first New York visit, she took them out to Harlem, and they were loving the fact that they weren't getting recognised and they could actually just sort of walk about a little bit, go into a cafe, not be recognised. So some really good talking heads from things like her, from Smokey Robinson, who talks about having seen the Beatles pre-fame when he was touring with the Miracles in Liverpool, and he went to see them in the Cavern. And he talks about how proud he was that they did, for example, You Really Got a Hold on Me. So things like that are really great. Some of the other talking heads from people who aren't known so much, I wasn't as keen on. One in particular, I'm not gonna name and shame anybody, but there was one in particular I thought I didn't really need to see you there. So they were a bit of a mixed bag. Going back to the actual movie footage now, it shows press articles from the time, from 1964, and it's quite funny seeing how snobby the press were at the time in 1964 about these long-haired English louts who potentially can't play their instruments. We're not sure if they can sing, they've not got any harmonies, and those articles look a little bit silly now because obviously they could only go on what they knew at the time. What we know now with the benefit of hindsight is that they were so much more than what they might have appeared in February 1964, but it's really interesting to see those. I did really like as well the initial fan reactions. So we've got a lot of 1964 footage down on the streets of New York from the fans who turned up to see these strange four English lads. I thought they were really fun. For example, there's one girl who was saying that she'd never really listened to rock and roll before. She didn't like it. She must have been maybe 15 years old, something like that. She was saying that she only liked classical music and Italian arias specifically, she pointed out, but that she absolutely loved the Beatles. So it was great to see that it was pulling in people who were not really traditionally into that kind of music. We've got a scene of Paul on the train. He's always in a hotel room. I can't remember now. Again, it moves so fast. Train, hotel, car. We see Paul talking to the camera, saying about, show this microphone down here, show it. They wouldn't normally show a microphone on a documentary. And he's going, go on, defy convention. And I thought it was great to see that even then, sort of a couple of years really before they got mega experimental with things like Revolver and then on Sgt. Pepper, that even then Paul's sort of trying to look at different ways of doing things. He's trying to get them to do things that they wouldn't normally do and push the boundaries a little bit, even though it was literally just show a microphone on screen. But I thought that gave us a little glimpse into the mind of Paul McCartney there. There is a lot of this documentary that is based around this book, Paul McCartney's Eyes of the Storm, 1964, that came out last year. To coincide with his photo exhibition. It started off in London at the National Portrait Gallery. It's been around various places in the world since, and there's a lot of this movie uses photographs from that book. I'll post a link down to it in the comments if this is a book that you haven't got yet that you're interested in. You can see a link to that. And also quite a few of the Talking Heads interviews and the interviews with Paul take place in the photo exhibition of Eyes of the Storm. Whether it's maybe one of the times it went to America, I'm not quite sure where, but it seems to me now, with the benefit of hindsight, was the Beatles 64 documentary and this sort of planned around each other? Did this know the existence of the new documentary? Because this ties in really well to this now, whereas we might not have known at the time that was going to be the case. I think one thing that you need to do with this documentary is really manage your expectations about how much 1964 footage of the Beatles you are going to see. This is an hour and 45 minutes. You're not going to see an hour and 45 minutes of the Beatles in America in 1964. It's a mere fraction of that. Now, for example, I pointed out specifically from 26 minutes into the documentary to 44 minutes, there's an 18-minute period there where you get at most 1 minute of the Beatles in 1964. The rest of it is talking heads, it's 1964 footage of fans, Paul talking, Ringo talking. So if you're expecting to see an hour and 46 minutes of Maysles brothers footage, that is not going to be the case. Don't expect that. If you expect that, you'll be disappointed. There was a real good sign that I think it showed the difference between fans then and fans now. There was a fan outside where the outside a theatre, a hotel, but they've got banners up saying how much they love the Beatles or whatever. And this one girl's got a sign that says, "Not the elephants, not the donkeys, but the Beatles." And you're just thinking, wow, you wouldn't get something like that nowadays. It really showed sort of the difference between the times of then and now, signs like that. It then cuts to the build-up to the Ed Sullivan show. They're in the hotel room beforehand. Murray the K's there with them. The DJ obviously attached himself to the Beatles. And there's some really fascinating footage. I'm not saying I've not seen this before, because I have seen it before, and probably a lot of you will have seen it before, but John sat there before the Ed Sullivan show. He's got a melodica, one of those, you sort of blow into it and it's like a keyboard, and he's playing the intro to Strawberry Fields Forever. Do, 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 do. And you just think, how long did they have these things going around in the head for before they actually became songs? Really interesting to see that. It then cuts to after-show footage in a club. Paul's saying goodnight to Murray the K in a sort of a fake Little Richard style afterwards, so that was quite funny to see. And then it moves on to Washington. So they've left New York, they're heading to Washington, and my God, it looks cold. It really does look cold there. They've got interviews with them on the train journey. There's this one again that you may have seen before, where somebody asks Paul about how the Beatles will be viewed in terms of Western culture in the future, and Paul's just laughing. He goes, "Culture? You're having a laugh? It's not culture, it's just a laugh." They really weren't thinking in those terms. I'm sure you would have got a massively different answer if Paul had been asked that question 2 or 3 years later. It goes on to the Washington Coliseum show, and again, it's footage that you've seen before, but it looks really nice, sounds really good, and it always makes me laugh seeing Ringo having to turn that circular rostrum that his drum kit sat on, him having to do that himself. Getting down and swivelling around that stage, just how times have changed, really. And you can see the jelly babies flying onto the stage. You can see them all littered across the stage and flying across. We've got some interviews with Harry Benson, photographer of the time, and the interesting thing, he was saying that even back then in 1964, that John Lennon was sort of saying about his fears about sort of violence in America. He was mentioning about like what Lee Harvey Oswald had done to John F. Kennedy, and the fact that was in his mind, and obviously what happened many years later. It's weird to think that John had those thoughts so much earlier. But then we've got a great version of Long Tall Sally. Paul and Ringo especially are absolutely nailing it, absolutely fantastic. The way Ringo's attacking the drums, and again, it sounds better quality than I've ever heard it. But then back to New York, which is how the trip unfolded. They then went from Washington back to New York to do some shows at Carnegie Hall, and John's on the train heading up to New York, and he says, "This is what our film will be like." Because obviously we're only a few weeks short here of them starting to film the Hard Day's Night movie. So it's interesting that they obviously knew roughly what that was going to be. They maybe knew what the story was going to be, if there is a story in A Hard Day's Night. Still not sure there really is. But John's sort of contemplating that, this is what our first movie is going to be like. And there's some really great footage at this point of John, and especially George, just larking about on the train, and George is putting on sort of waiters' uniforms and just really having a good laugh. He's laying on luggage racks up top. Really fun footage, and you get the impression that when you're watching the Beatles in these moments where they're not in public, they're on a train or they're in a hotel room, that we see everybody else going mad for the Beatles, but you think that nobody realised the madness, I think, more than the Beatles. That you can tell that they're just as astonished by what's happening as everybody else is, and it's great to see those things happening in the background. We're then on to Miami. It's a bit warmer, yes, where they do the second Ed Sullivan appearance. So we see Twist and Shout, which sounds great. And then we see This Boy, which... beautiful live version of This Boy. Again, you'll have all seen these clips before, but it made me wonder here because it was literally just a few minutes after we'd heard John Lennon reading out a press interview from New York or Washington, saying that the Beatles they couldn't sing properly, there was no harmonies, and I wondered, did they always know they were going to play This Boy, or did they decide to pick it because of the great harmonies? These press are saying we don't do harmonies. We'll show them harmonies. So I wondered what the events were that led up to them doing This Boy in Ed Sullivan. Could it have been something to do with that? Just my speculation. It then cuts to George in a hotel room again, and he's doing real nice... he's playing guitar, just an acoustic guitar. He's just sat in a chair. But he's doing Woody Guthrie style, but with a thick Northern English accent, which is quite funny. But very much a sort of Woody Guthrie American country style. And that's really the end of the movie. An hour and 3/4 goes by very quickly. We then get to... We've got a bit of an aftermath of them coming back home, them being interviewed when they get back to England. We've got some 1970s footage of John being interviewed about what he thought the Beatles' influence was and what madness happened in that time. And we're into the end credits already, where they show Roll Over Beethoven from Washington concert. Again, sounds really great and sort of surprising that when we know that George had missed photo shoots just 2 or 3 days earlier in New York because he wasn't well, his throat was rough, and here he is singing on stage in Washington 2 or 3 days later. So well done, George, for overcoming your illness and doing that. And I noticed during the end credits, it was interesting to see executive producer Jeff Jones. Now, Jeff Jones has been the head of Apple. He's run Apple since Neil Aspinall stepped down. Must have been, about 2006, 2007, something like that. He's been in charge a long time, but it was announced a few weeks ago, you may have seen, that he's stepping down. He's leaving Apple, and he's overseen all these projects that we've had over the last sort of 16, 17 years. Have been him heading them up. And he's not going to be there now, so could this be one of the last projects that he was involved in for the Beatles? Is it going to have an effect on what Beatles projects we get in the future? It's going to be very interesting to see. But also over the end credits, we hear an interview with John in Paris. So they'd been in Paris for several days before they then went on to America. The interviewer introduced him as John Lemon, so they're still getting used to the names. But there's a nice little interview with John there over the end credits, so don't skip those. So overall, what did I think of this? I loved seeing the footage of the Beatles in '64, and because it's just great seeing them before everything got too serious. In Paul's own words, it's just a laugh, and they really were having a laugh. You could tell that they were confused by the madness going on around them. I enjoyed seeing the fans. At the time, I wasn't that bothered about seeing those fans 60 years later giving their memories. Just me, you might really enjoy that. But also, as I say, really manage your expectations. I think you will see somebody no doubt will tot it all up at some point, but I would be surprised if you see much more than about 15 minutes of the Beatles in America 1964 during this hour and 3/4. The rest is other stuff. It's fascinating. At the end of the day, you're spending an hour and 3/4 watching a documentary about the Beatles with some great footage. Fantastic. Just don't expect to be seeing all of the Beatles in '64 because that ain't what it is. But overall, really enjoyable. I'm glad it's out there. Hopefully we'll get a physical release at some point, but hopefully the next thing to get that from Disney will be Let It Be. Fingers crossed, we don't know. So yeah, let me know down in the comments what you think about it. I need to go back and watch it again and take it all in properly without writing loads of notes. But thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye bye.